Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. The Corrections Association says New Zealand's prisons are in crisis. Last year saw record-breaking numbers of assaults on staff, almost double what they were just 7 years ago. There were also more than 1,500 prisoner-on-prisoner attacks, the highest annual figure on record. All of this comes with overcrowding, tight budgets, and a growing gang and meth problem. Today on The Front Page, NZ Herald senior reporter Derek Cheng is with us to dive into the numbers. So Derek, when you began looking into corrections' latest prison assault data, what stood out to you?
Well, the figures are the highest on record, and obviously the prison population fluctuates and the number of prison officers fluctuates. At the moment, the prison population is at an all-time high. It's just under 10,900. And the last time it was more or less the same population number was back in March 2018. So it's interesting to compare the numbers. So, I mean, corrections keeps this data. It's prisoner-on-prisoner assaults and prisoner-on-staff assaults. So in the last year, which is 24-25, there were almost 1,600 prisoner-prisoner assaults, and there were almost 1,100 prisoner-staff assaults. And if you compare that to the 27-18 year, which was when the prison population was almost just as high, there are almost twice as many prisoner-staff assaults now, or in the latest year than then. And there's, I think it's a 28% increase in the number of prisoner-prisoner assaults.
Is this surge mainly about more violence or more reporting of small incidents, do you think?
Well, if you break the numbers down, the corrections data is based on serious assault, non-serious assault, and no injury assault. So serious assault essentially is something that requires a visit to the hospital or has led to a police charge. So the bar is reasonably high. And then you have a non-serious assault, which is an injury which hasn't led to a hospital visit or a police charge. And then you have a no injury assault, like, you know, a shove or I throw something at you or something like that, something small that doesn't result in injury. So the numbers are actually quite stable with serious assaults. And in fact, they went down slightly in the last year compared to the previous year. The majority of the increase is definitely from non-serious and no injury assaults. And corrections has also provided like a breakdown per prison. So it's interesting to look at each prison, although, I mean, there are so many factors involved in what happens and how an assault comes to be and whether it's recorded and all those things. Corrections has also said that there's definitely been a bigger focus on reporting and that may explain some of the increase in the numbers.
You mentioned the rising prison population is becoming more complex with higher proportions of remand prisoners. You've got gang-affiliated inmates and meth users as well. How central is this complexity, this cocktail, to the rise of assaults?
Well, corrections definitely thinks that the complexity of the prison population has led to increasing chances of violence. People who have a history of heavy meth use who then go to prison are more likely to be involved in violence. I think the corrections themselves refer to it as kind of like pack beatings that happen in prison, and they tend to be gang-related. So if there are more gang members in prisons, then there tend to be those kinds of assaults. Just looking at the data as well, there's more Category 3 sentences coming through the courts, and they are the more serious offences, punishable by at least 2 years in prison. There is definitely a truth about the complexity of the average prisoner, and I guess that would mean that your average prisoner is more likely to end up in these assault figures.
It doesn't really surprise us, though, does it, that prisoner numbers have gone up, because National's whole tough on crime stance actually promised more people in prisons.
That's right, and there's a number of policies there. There's the sentencing reforms, there's the return of 3 strikes, there's the ending of the Section 27 reports for state funding. All of these are projected to mean a prison population that's 3,000 higher in 10 years' time than without those policies. Money for corrections is based on these forecasts, right? So in this year's budget, the government set aside a certain amount of money for corrections to manage, and it's based on a forecast. And the forecast was for, I think, 10,860 prisoners by June next year. The forecast back then, I mean, it was basically way out, because we're currently at 10,869 months ahead of schedule. And that basically means that as the prison population grows, which it's expected to, then the corrections budget per prisoner is shrinking unless they ask for more money, which they haven't. So corrections is just managing with a baseline, and it's just increasingly harder as the prison population grows, the complexity of the prisoners coming in grows. They were basically in a bit of a staffing crisis a few years ago because the prison population was shooting up since the start of 2022, and then they're just playing catch up with frontline staff. They've made a big recruitment drive last year, and they've halved the attrition rate, which is the staff turnover rate. So they're actually in a better position than they have been, but they're still 277 officers, corrections officers, short of where they want to be. And corrections describes this, and there's a beautiful managerial phrase, suboptimal custodial frontline resilience, which basically means they're not operating with the ideal level of staff. And that really puts the staff under pressure. I should also add that this is nothing new for corrections. Like the forecast that was based for the prisoner forecast that was used on the basis for funding for budget 2024 was also way below the numbers that eventually came out. So they've been doing this for a while. And how long they can do it for is anyone's guess, but it's certainly suboptimal in corrections' own term.
Well, they're constantly playing catch up, hey, and I'm never calling anything bad again. I'm going to be calling it suboptimal from now on.
No, we're the best we've ever been in the last 8 years in terms of staff. We're in the best position we have been in 8 years.
So why are they saying it's suboptimal?
It's not suboptimal at all. It's not the corrections saying that it's suboptimal. They're saying that corrections are in the best place they've been. Like I said, for 8 years, as an incoming government, they started a new recruiting campaign. That's been extremely successful. We've got a massive pipeline of people wanting to join and become corrections officers. We've got another 70 officers being trained and ready to deploy at the moment.
You also bring up double bunking, which has become an issue, and it's even been linked to a prisoner killing his cellmate. Do experts see double bunking as an unavoidable necessity or a policy failure that's fueling that violence?
Well, that probably depends on who you ask.
Right.
I remember double bunking was brought in, I think in 2010 or 2011 under the previous national government. I was actually part of a cohort of journalists that were taken to Rimitaka prison to sample the double bunking. And, the cells were fairly roomy. They were fairly comfortable. Also, wasn't sharing it with a mongrel mob member. So it wasn't particularly dangerous, but double bunking has been quite controversial. It's been increasingly used. I should say that there's no current sort of capacity crisis because there was a recent addition to Icaria. So now the current capacity is over 12,000. But 45% of the prison population is now double bunked. So that's basically 5,000 prisoners. It's a lot, right? And if we didn't have double bunking, then we wouldn't have capacity. So it is a necessity. Prisoners are screened before they're put in a double bunk, but obviously that's not foolproof. And as the Corrections Association President Floyd Duplessis was saying earlier this week, that creates violence, that creates tensions. We've got suboptimal staffing. So again, not great. Assaults are going up, and there's no sort of reprieve coming. Corrections
what's Mark Mitchell said about frontline staffing levels?
He says things are going great. And obviously that's a political perspective, but it's not entirely untrue because there was much more of a staffing crisis a few years ago, and they are in a much better position. But obviously they would like to have more, hundreds more, in fact. And, you know, kind of both perspectives are correct. Things are better than they used to be, but they're still at such a level where it creates more risk for the staff. And the staff are, you know, you got to feel for them because they can only have the numbers that corrections provides, which is based on government budgets, but they're on the front line. They deal with all of the complexities of that happen behind bars. And they're saying that there are so few staff now that there's a whole bunch of vacant shifts that aren't being filled. Corrections says that, you know, that's not because there's not enough staff. It's because often for sick leave or some unforeseeable leave, and then a decision is made not to bring more people in because it can be the prison can be safely managed as it is. But the union says, you know, it puts us more in danger. It puts them more in danger. It creates more tension in the behind bars, and you know, the risks are heightened.
I mean, the union says and has told you that it's already a crisis, but the minister says it isn't. Who do you reckon's closer to the truth?
Well, I mean, they have different perspectives, right? I mean, the Corrections Association, they represent the frontline staff. They don't want to see their frontline staff in danger. Obviously, there's going to be some danger because that's just the inherent nature of the job. They want to avoid that as much as possible. Part of that is having proper levels. Part of that is minimising the vacant shifts. And the minister, he backs the staff and he backs corrections, but he's also kind of hamstrung because, you know, it's the finance minister who decides how much money they get. Corrections just deals with the back end of the justice pipeline. You know, how many people go there isn't up to corrections. They just have to manage it. It's all about crime and police and charges and court timeliness, and that just piles it all up at the corrections end. There you go. You've only got this much money. You've only got this much staff. Good luck to you.
Well, has Corrections given any indication of any new funding requests for next year?
Well, in Budget 2025, they asked for a tag contingency, which is basically we want this money, which the government gave them, to manage our forecast, which, as I said earlier, has been met 9 months ahead of forecast. And the tag contingency is basically, if you can give us this extra money, you can put it on the shelf. It's just for us in case there are more prisoners than the forecast number. And that would be great because then we can just pull it off the shelf if those numbers are higher than forecast, which they now are. Nicola Willis said no, based on Treasury advice. They said, well, in fact, I think it's better just to make you ask for out-of-cycle funding, they call it. So Corrections has not asked for that money. Mark Mitchell told me last week that you know, he's ready to support them if they need that money. But there's such a fiscal crunch on the government. I mean, they've got so little available money, and they're squeezing every department for every last cent. You know, like they're taking hundreds of millions of dollars from foreign tourists, for example, which is meant to go to tourism and conservation, and then just kind of squirreling it down over here for us. Thank you very much. So, you know, it costs $1.7 billion a year for Corrections to manage the prison population. So there's all this pressure on them to just do everything within baseline, which is what they're doing so far. I just hope that, you know, if they really need more money because safety is at risk, they'll ask for it and the government will give it to them.
Thanks for joining us, Derek.
You're welcome.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is produced by Jane Yee and Richard Martin, who is also our editor. I'm Chelsea Daniels. Subscribe to The Front Page on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in on Monday for another look behind the headlines.